All right, first up on the 5 headlines, and I sort of keyed in on that early. Let's talk about UFC 210, right? I mean, there's news to get to as well, but let's talk about this pay-per-view. Daniel Cormier versus Anthony Johnson. I already gave sort of my preliminary thoughts on it. John, I'll open the floor to you. Kind of take this in whatever direction you want. What do you think of the fight?
Yeah, it's funny, man. Sitting there listening to your opinion, I respect it. I was, nodding politely, but it's because I agree with a lot of it. It's a fight that when it happened the first time, it's an interesting fight, right? It's such a clash of styles. I mean, it's the heavy hitter versus the grinding wrestler, and that's always going to be the case. And we saw how that played out the first time around. Anthony Johnson did get the big shot in. It looked like the fight might be over right away, and then Cormier came back and grinded him out until he got the finish. And it still sets up that exact way. But kind of like you said, I think number one, obviously we didn't know at the time that John Jones was going to be out of the mix for a long time, so I think that's one reason we're excited to have a big fight. I think this is the biggest fight you can make at light heavyweight right now with John Jones sitting on the sidelines. And you're right, the way Rumble has looked since that time, as you said, the knockouts that have come, but just how ferociously he's done it and how relaxed he is. He seems to be like in a different mental place right now. There's no pressure, there's no tension. He just seems to be relaxed and going in and doing what he does best. And I'm fired up for this fight. I really am. I think it's the biggest fight that we've had. The schedule's been a little slow to start 2017. We know what the UFC is dealing with all the stars on the sidelines. Some may be done for good. And I feel like this is a big fight. I'm excited for it. The other thing I'm really excited about is just the fact of what 2017 means for Daniel Cormier. I mean, you think about how he's going to look in history. I mean, look at what he's accomplished. I feel like he's one of the most under-respected guys in the game. You look at what he's accomplished at heavyweight, what he's accomplished at light heavyweight, but I think, the looming presence of John Jones is just like, well, that's the Phil Mickelson to the Tiger Woods. He was pretty good, but he wasn't that great. No, he was pretty damn good.
Yeah.
But if he can come back and beat Rumble Johnson again, and then get that summer fight with John Jones, coming off a long layoff, coming off who knows what, and find a way to beat John Jones, I think he finally gets the respect he deserves, and you start talking about him as one of the greatest ever. If he loses to John Jones, maybe you give him a pass. If he loses here, maybe he never gets the respect.
Yeah, I don't even think he gets the respect if he wins this fight and then goes on and loses to John. I still think that. Don't get me wrong, I think fans will look back and say Daniel Cormier did a lot in the sport, and he was. Hey, Phil Mickelson's a good golfer. People like Phil Mickelson. People say Phil Mickelson was very, very good at what he did, but he was not Tiger Woods.
Right.
And I don't think DC will enjoy doing that. So that almost brings up a question of what is DC's motivation in this fight? And he's not going to say, well, he actually does. He comes out and says that I need to beat John Jones. I have to beat that fight for my legacy. That is, I'm not going to hide from that. It's obvious. It's plain as day. Everybody knows that. So is this fight a number one contender fight? I mean, is that, and I know that's almost disrespectful to say. And I have myself said on this podcast that I look at this as a real official title fight. I understand that John Jones is the best light heavyweight, but he's out based on his own actions. So these guys are eligible. They deserve to be called champion. But in a way, is DC's motivation just that ticket to John still, even though he's the champion?
Pretty much. I mean, right? I mean, anybody that's holding the belt right now has an asterisk, right? I mean, it was funny. I was talking to Glover Teixeira and Alexander Gustafsson last week, who they have a big light heavyweight fight coming up, who knows what it actually means. But, I was kind of talking to them, hey, do you want a shot at the title or do you want a shot at John Jones? And, Alexander Gustafsson, of course, he has the history. He's like, dude, of course you want to fight John Jones. Glover Teixeira says, of course you want to fight John Jones. You want to be the guy to beat John Jones. So, yeah, I mean, it would be disrespectful to say this isn't a title fight, to say, oh, come on, this isn't a real champion. He is. He is absolutely a real champion. But in terms of historical perspective, absolutely, this is kind of a number one contender fight. This is a ticket to fight John Jones. And in order to be a truly recognized champion, to truly say I was the best in my era, you have to beat John Jones. There's no question about it.
Betting odds are up, and I believe as of this morning, we're taping this on a Tuesday, and he has been, the favorite is Anthony Johnson.
Really?
Slight favorite.
Wow.
Based on your reaction, now I want to check myself to make sure I'm not lying to you, but very, very slight.
Sure.
We're talking minus 120, even fight. Yeah, right now he's minus 125, and DC is plus 105. And I got to say that surprised me. I understand that Daniel is older, and he would appear to have more mileage on him. He's getting injured here and there. He's dealing with injuries that Rumble is not. And just Rumble, I mean, the knockouts and how explosive he is. And now he's gotten to train for DC. But I got to tell you, I would not lay any money on Anthony Johnson as a favorite in this fight. I look at this fight and I say to myself, what has really changed? What has changed? And I think the best I can come up with is that DC is 2 years older and had a few more injuries. But other than that, wrestling, I think, beats Anthony Johnson. That's my take on it.
No, I agree with what you're saying. I was surprised to hear, and it's funny because I am actually leaning slightly towards Anthony Johnson in this fight, just because he does have that power, which is so amazing. But it wouldn't shock me at all to see things play out exactly the way they did in the first fight with Cormier just grinding him out, which is why I wouldn't put any money on him as a favorite either. The question marks to me, I guess, are, where is Cormier's motivation? We talked about it being John Jones, but where is it overall in his career? I mean, he does have a pretty nice little broadcasting career going, and he
sure
said
does.
straight up, I can live off that. He's like, it's just good living. It's not like that's just a couple bucks on the side. I don't need to fight anymore. So, is he thinking about that a little bit? He's got his family. He's got. I was watching an embedded episode this morning, and final week of training camp, and he's putting snacks together for his little kid's softball team.
Yeah.
How much has Cain Velasquez been there? He always talks about Cain being the guy that, iron sharpens iron, and who can best me more than Cain Velasquez pushes me every day. How much has Cain been there? Has he really been that present? So I do see question marks a little bit, but I am surprised, especially with this being a rematch. Now, if this was the first time they fought, and you got all those question marks, and you go, plus Anthony Johnson with that power, I think he's a slight favorite. We saw the fight.
Yeah.
We saw how it can play out, so that shocks me a little bit.
Yeah. I'm going with Daniel Cormier in this fight. My predictions will come out later. Maybe I shouldn't have said that. I don't know if I'm giving away, what the week's later content is, but I don't know. I think we saw it, and I'm not saying that Anthony Johnson doesn't have a chance, of course, but I'm just saying that watch that first round real closely, because DC says it straight up. I got to survive the first 7 minutes, and then the rest of the time is mine. And I don't think that is necessarily a wrong description of how this fight plays out. I'm going to go to the co-main event. It's Chris Weidman versus Gegard Mousasi. This is a terrific co-main event, I really think. Again, this card, when you compare it to 211, a lot of people say, well, what's up with Buffalo? Why didn't they give this card any love? You're getting love with Chris Weidman and Gegard Mousasi, even though Weidman is coming off of the 2 losses. I love this fight, and I've got my thoughts on it. But again, I'll open the floor to you. Just what are you paying attention to in this one?
I love this fight too. Yeah, the pay-per-view overall is not great, but these top 2 fights, these are top-notch fights, and I love this fight. Interesting fight, man. Chris Weidman. It seems like in the MMA sphere, it's real easy. A guy loses a couple fights, and you just write him off. But that guy was never that good to begin with. Hold on. He was fighting incredibly competitive in both those fights he lost. And, as he said to me late last week, he's like, man, I can boil those fights down to one mistake I made and why I lost. And you're absolutely right. He can make those arguments. So, still a stud in Chris Weidman. Meanwhile, Gegard Mousasi, fighting better than I think he has at any point in his career. It seems like he's finally really all in. In the past, it just seemed like he kind of fought just because, man, I'm a fighter. Now it feels like he's really there. He's driven. He knows what he wants to accomplish. The title means something to him. So I love the fight. The weird part about it is I don't know exactly what it means at middleweight right now because, with George St. Pierre stepping back in and screwing everything up. I mean, how crazy.
Yeah.
George St. Pierre stepping back in and fighting Michael Bisping in International Fight Week, awesome. It seems to make sense. Yeah, sorry, Yoel Romero, you're going to sit on the sidelines for a little bit. Then we got these number 1 contender fights. Now with that maybe not taking place till the fall, it's a mess at middleweight. You got Jacare fighting Robert Whittaker a week later. So it's big times in the middleweight division. I don't know that we can necessarily say exactly what the stakes are, but I love the fight, and I think the winner of this fight, other than Yoel Romero, is probably in the driver's seat.
I get asked this question all the time before UFC pay-per-view, and it comes from, local radio shows, fans like to, it's a phrase that they like to use, and that's must win. Is this a must win fight? And so people have been asking that about Weidman here. 2 losses, has not won a fight since May of 2015. At UFC 187, actually, the same card that Daniel Cormier and Anthony Johnson fought the first time. Is this a must-win for Chris Weidman? I mean, you know how people like to drive that narrative. Obviously, in some ways, and this is kind of my go-to answer, every fight is a must-win. But You know what I'm talking about. Is this a must-win for Chris?
Yeah, it's funny because that was the first thought that came to my mind. I think it's almost a cliche, but you're right. Every fight is a must-win. Otherwise, you're delayed a year, 18 months, 24 months in your career. I still think he's got time on his side. I think he's 32 years old, doesn't have a ton of mileage. He's not some 50-fight veteran. So I think he's still got time. But yeah, to accomplish what he wants to accomplish, this is a must-win. I mean, this is when you start. Now you're sliding down for his next fight. You'd be like, well, now we need to match you up with somebody outside the top 10 because you've got to get something back under your belt. So if he wants to remain in title contention, which he says he does, he says, listen, I want to fight the best. Because I asked him, and I've heard people question like his management, like, wouldn't you take more of, quote unquote warm-up fight? Not that there's any easy fights in the UFC, but I could see that logic saying, dude, do we have to fight Mousasi? Maybe we could find something else. I mean, heck, Robert Whittaker might be an easier fight, and still a ranked guy, but he wanted to fight the best. So short answer, yeah, every fight's a must-win. Longer answer, no, I don't think so. I think he's still got time and mileage left on his body.
I'm right there with you. This is an important fight in his career, no doubt about it. I'm not saying that he needs to go out there and be like, oh, I can afford to lose. No, you always have to win. But just because there's nowhere to go in that middleweight division, and Chris Weidman is a name. Those 2 wins over Anderson Silva, he's sort of that kind of quasi-star. He's not like the full pay-per-view star. He needs some help. But he has name value. And so this is an important fight, but I don't really characterize it as a must-win for him.
If he loses, tell me he can't headline that show in Long Island in the summer.
Oh, win or lose, he's absolutely headlining at the Coliseum.
Fox?
Yeah, I mean that's the hometown kid. That is his chance. And I'll tell you that if he loses this fight, then that fight is a must-win for him.
That's a must-win.
You put him in the headlining spot in Long Island, then it's a must-win for him.